At 7 o'clock on a Monday morning, a 26-year-old man kissed his family goodbye. He was going to work. His 3-year-old daughter was watching from the street. She was wearing her bluey pajamas. Moments later, federal agents surrounded his white Kia sedan. There were shouts. There was a confrontation. And then 6 shots. His wife was screaming on the pavement next to him. His daughter was standing there watching. A neighbor who witnessed it told reporters she heard an older woman at the scene yelling at the agents, "You took her dad, you took her dad." Joan Sebastian Guerrero was 26 years old. He was a husband, a father, a DoorDash delivery driver in the small coastal city of Biddeford, Maine. He was authorized to work in the United States. He had a social security number. He had a Facebook page full of photos of his wife and his little girl. And he was not even the person federal agents were looking for. This is True Crime Explainer, where we follow the evidence, give the victim back their story, and ask the questions that the headlines leave unanswered. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now. Because what I'm about to show you, about what happened on that corner in Maine, what the agents didn't have on their bodies, and what the government said versus what the witnesses saw, is a story that cannot be told in a 60-second news clip. Joan Sebastian Guerrero came to Biddeford, Maine from Colombia. He was 26 years old. He lived in the same building as his neighbor Nelson Elias, the man who would later stand in the street and tell reporters exactly what he saw on the morning of July 13, 2026. Elias knew Guerrero from the neighborhood. He knew him from the restaurant where Elias worked. Guerrero had picked up DoorDash orders there. They had realized they were neighbors. They had chatted. He described Guerrero in 3 sentences. He was a good person. He was quiet and reserved. He worked hard to provide for his wife and a 3-year-old daughter. Guerrero was legally authorized to work in the United States. The Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition and Present, Maine, 2 advocacy organizations that had been in contact with his family, confirmed he had been issued a social security number. He had gone through the process. He had the documentation. He was, by every available measure, a man who was doing what the system asked him to do. On the morning of July 13, 2026, he was on his way to work. At approximately 7 a.m. at the intersection of Poole Street and Hill Street in Biddeford, federal agents moved on his vehicle. According to witness Lucas Scott, 18 years old, who was driving through that intersection at the moment it unfolded, he saw a group of unmarked vehicles descend on Guerrero's car. He saw agents in ice vests confronting the driver, and then he heard the shots. One neighbor, J. Thomas McHugh, heard the shots from his home on Poole Street. He looked out the window. He saw federal agents. He saw someone on the ground. "Nobody should have to see what I saw," said another neighbor, Daniel Boucher, 71. He said he saw a large white vehicle ram a smaller one. He said he saw an officer open the door and pull out the young man whose head was bleeding profusely. "I heard him say, 'I tried to stop,'" Boucher told NBC News. Joan Sebastian Guerrero died at the scene. His wife was on the pavement beside him. His daughter in her bluey pajamas was watching from the street. Within hours of the shooting, U.S. Senator Angus King, an independent from Maine, stood in front of cameras at the Portland International Jetport and told reporters what he had learned directly from Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin. He said Mullin told him the following: the man had been given an order to leave the country. He was in a vehicle, he pulled out in the vehicle, and the term the secretary used was weaponized the vehicle. On that basis, Senator King told reporters an ICE agent shot and killed him, and then Senator King said something that made every reporter in that room go quiet. He said, "Body cameras were not on the agents, so we have no video evidence of what occurred in this case." No body cameras in 2026. During the most scrutinized immigration enforcement campaign in American history. On the day federal agents used lethal force against a 26-year-old man in front of his wife and daughter, not a single one of them was wearing a body camera. King asked Mullin when body cameras would be standard. He was told they were coming, possibly within 45 days. King's response deserves to be heard exactly as he said it. "I am concerned that they should have been having body cameras 2 years ago when all this started. It shouldn't be a case of, oh well, maybe we should do something about body cameras." Now, here is where this case takes a turn that very few of the initial headlines caught, because the story changed within hours of that press conference. Angus King said DHS told him the man was the target of a warrant. Then, hours later, King's own office released a statement. The Homeland Security Secretary had called King back. The statement read, "The victim of today's federal law enforcement shooting was not the target of the warrant. The target, the agents were in Biddeford executing an arrest warrant for someone else. Joan Sebastian Guerrero was not that person. He was not on any list. He was not the subject of any warrant." He was a man leaving his home to go to work, and he drove into a federal law enforcement operation that had nothing to do with him. And then somebody shot him 6 times through his windshield. DHS eventually broke nearly 12 hours of silence with a statement. It said the ICE officer fired his weapon, fearing for public safety. It did not explain what specifically caused that fear. It did not name the officer. It provided no further details. That statement is the entirety of what the federal government has said about the death of Joan Sebastian Guerrero as of this recording. But here is the thing that takes this case from outrageous to something that demands to be examined with a microscope. This is not the first time this has happened. Joan Sebastian Guerrero was not the first person ICE agents have shot and killed this month. He was not the first person ICE described as having weaponized a vehicle. And the pattern of what happens after these shootings, who investigates, who is accountable, and what the public is actually told, is the story that every major outlet is covering on the surface. But nobody has gone deep on it yet. Stay with me. Joan Sebastian Guerrero was shot and killed by ICE agents in Maine on July 13, 2026, less than 1 week before. On July 7, Lorenzo Salgado Araujo was shot and killed by ICE agents in Houston, Texas. He was a Mexican immigrant. He had no criminal convictions. DHS said he had weaponized his vehicle. Some Texas officials have publicly questioned that account. He was also not the target of the operation. And before that, in January 2026, 2 people were shot and killed by federal agents in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Renee Good and Alex Pretty. Both died during immigration enforcement operations. Both cases triggered national protests. New footage released after their deaths raised questions about what actually occurred in the moments before the shots were fired. That is 3 separate fatal shooting incidents, 3 separate states, 3 separate federal operations. All within the same year, all involving the same federal agency, all resulting in deaths, all with the same description from DHS, weaponized vehicle. And in the Maine case, with no body camera footage, here is the data point that needs to sit alongside all of that. ICE arrested 546 people in Maine between the start of the current administration and March 2026. The most recent data available, provided to the University of California, Berkeley Deportation Data Project, and analyzed by the Associated Press, shows that approximately 45% of those arrested had criminal backgrounds. That means 55% did not. During the equivalent period under the previous administration, roughly 69% of those arrested in Maine had criminal backgrounds. The agency has publicly stated it is targeting the, quote, worst of the worst. Joan Sebastian Guerrero had a social security number, a work permit, a wife, and a 3-year-old daughter in bluey pajamas. He was not even on the warrant. Here is where the justice system failure becomes impossible to ignore. Multiple investigations have been launched into the death of Joan Sebastian Guerrero. Let me name them. The Maine Attorney General's office is investigating. The FBI is at the scene and investigating. And the DHS Office of Inspector General, the internal watchdog for the very department that employs ICE, has also opened an investigation. Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, put it in writing. She said, "The shooting in Biddeford requires a full and impartial investigation of what happened." Maine Democratic Representative Chelly Pingree was more direct. In a video posted to social media, she asked the questions that the federal government has not answered. She said, and I want to read this exactly, "Were they pursuing someone with a criminal record? Was this a random traffic stop? How did this possibly happen and why was this person shot? Were the officers wearing body cameras? Will there be investigations?" And then she asked the question that has become the defining question of this case. "But more than anything else, I want to know, why are you in Maine?" Now, I want to address something that always comes up in cases like this, and that should be addressed directly rather than glossed over. ICE agents, like all law enforcement, have the legal right to defend themselves if they believe their lives are in danger. A vehicle can be used as a weapon. Those are facts. But here is also a fact. DHS itself confirmed within hours of the shooting that Joan Sebastian Guerrero was not the target of the warrant they were there to execute. That means they were in contact with a man they had no warrant for. They were attempting to detain or stop a man they had no legal basis to be pursuing. And in the course of that encounter, they shot him 6 times. The DHS Inspector General investigating this case is the watchdog for DHS. DHS is investigating DHS. The agency that employed the agent who fired the weapon is part of the structure overseeing the investigation into whether that agent was justified. Senator King addressed this directly. He told DHS Secretary Mullen he expected, publicly, that the investigation would be, in his words, full, fair and transparent. He said he would hold Mullen to that commitment. The investigation is ongoing. No charges have been filed against any agent. The name of the agent who fired has not been publicly released. The officer has been placed on administrative leave, standard protocol in police-involved shootings, standard protocol, for the shooting of a man who was not on any warrant, on his way to a delivery shift in front of his 3-year-old daughter. Before I get into the federal government's account and why it keeps changing, I want to take 30 seconds. Because I get messages every week from people watching this channel asking how I find these stories, how I structure them, and how I tell them in a way that makes people stay until the end. I turned everything this channel does into a step-by-step course. It is called the True Crime Content Playbook, how to build a high-retention true crime channel from zero using 4 storytelling pillars. You can see exactly how every script on this channel is built: the shock hook, the police failure section, the justice system angle, the defense attorney section, all laid out for you to use on your own channel. The link is in the description. Check it out after the video. Now, back to Maine. Because the federal government's account has already changed once and the questions it raises are the most important ones in this entire case. I want to walk you through exactly how the federal government's account of this shooting has evolved, because the evolution itself is a story. 7 a.m., July 13th. Joan Sebastian Guerrero is shot and killed at Poole Street and Hill Street in Biddeford, Maine. Late morning. Senator Angus King holds a press conference. He says DHS Secretary Mullen told him the man was the target of an arrest warrant because he had a final deportation order. He says Mullen told him the man weaponized his vehicle. King relays this to the public as the federal government's account. Hours later, King's office releases a new statement. DHS Secretary Mullen has called King back. The victim was not the target of the warrant. That account, which King had just publicly relayed, was wrong. Nearly 12 hours after the shooting, DHS releases its first official statement. It says the officer fired fearing for public safety. No elaboration. No timeline. No name, no body camera footage to verify anything. Now place that account alongside what the witnesses say. Witness Daniel Boucher says he heard the man say, "I tried to stop." Lucas Scott says he saw the agents confront the driver and then heard shots fired. Neighbor Nelson Elias says he heard 6 shots, and then came outside to find his neighbor on the ground, his wife screaming, his daughter on the street. Witness Cecilia Humiston says a little girl in bluey pajamas was crying at the scene. She says an officer yelled at the child as she tried to smell flowers near the memorial, and one more thing that the Portland Press-Herald confirmed from the scene. The body of Joan Sebastian Guerrero lay on the pavement of Poole Street for 5 hours after the shooting before it was removed. His blood was on the sidewalk. A woman came and wrote in chalk next to it, "This is blood." Joan Sebastian Guerrero came to the United States from Colombia. He was authorized to work. He had a social security number. He had a Facebook page full of photos of his wife and his little girl. He drove for DoorDash. He chatted with his neighbors. He was quiet and reserved and worked hard. On the morning of July 13th, 2026, he drove out of his building to go to work and into a federal immigration operation that had nothing to do with him. He was shot 6 times. He died on the pavement of Poole Street in Biddeford, Maine. His wife was next to him. His daughter watched it happen. The agent who shot him has not been named. The body camera that would have recorded what happened was not there. The investigation is in its earliest hours. The federal government has already changed its account once. And on the sidewalk in Biddeford, flowers and candles are growing in the place where he fell. Every elected official in the state of Maine has called for a full, transparent, independent investigation. The FBI is involved. The Maine AG is involved. DHS's own watchdog is involved. What none of them can give back is what Joan Sebastian Guerrero's 3-year-old daughter lost on a Monday morning before breakfast. Say his name in the comments. Tell me what question in this case you most need answered. Because this story is not over and this channel will be here every time it moves. Subscribe if you haven't. Turn on notifications. I will be back the moment there is new information. And if you want to understand exactly how stories like this are researched, structured, and told in a way that keeps people watching to the end, the link to my True Crime Content Playbook course is in the description. Everything I do on this channel laid out step by step. Joan Sebastian Guerrero, 26 years old, husband, father, Biddeford, Maine. July 13th, 2026. His name deserves to be remembered.